Ontario Premier Kathleen Wynne has promised to make full-day daycare free for preschoolers if the Liberals win the next election. That's coming up in June. But there are concerns around where this money will come from and whether or not the system can actually handle all the extra demand. Joining us from Ottawa this morning with more is Executive Director of Child Care Advocacy Association of Canada, Morna Ballantyne. Good to have you with us this morning.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Lots of questions since this announcement came out yesterday. First of all, we know that daycare costs across Canada have risen 3 times faster than the cost of inflation. That's according to the Centre for Policy Alternatives. Is this something, free childcare spaces from 2.5 until kindergarten, something that the province of Ontario can afford to do?
Well, you know, that in many ways is a decision for the finance minister and for the legislature. But budgets are all about choices. And I think that spending on childcare would be a very wise and good choice for the government to make, as it would be for provincial and territorial governments across the country, and as it would be for the federal government as well. And the main reason for that is that if a government spends money on childcare, makes it more available, makes it affordable, and increases the quality of childcare, what you end up with, and we know this from the evidence of other countries, and we also know this from the evidence from Quebec, is that it will mean that a greater number of women are going to participate in the paid labor force, and that is incredibly good for the economy. It really grows the economy, generates more taxes for government, and it also puts more money in the pockets of parents, and that's a good thing, especially parents with young children, because they have a lot of expenses to meet.
I want to talk about wait times in just a moment, but first, let's pick up on what you mentioned about Quebec. This seems to be the golden example that we hold up across the country, how they subsidize childcare, and it seems to be a model that pays for itself. They break even. So why then not adopt that model for the rest of the country?
Well, you know, with childcare, with many things, we have sort of 2 sides. We have a demand side, those are the parents who have a demand for childcare, and then we have the supply side, and that's the provision of childcare services. And what they did in Quebec, and what really should be replicated across the country, and it's starting to be in different places, including just recently in British Columbia. We've heard some really encouraging announcements, and we have a bit of this in PEI already in Manitoba. What we have in Quebec is that a government a number of years ago chose to directly fund the supply side of childcare. So instead of putting all or most of government money into subsidies for parents so that they could then have a little bit, or some parents could have a little bit more money to go in the childcare market and purchase services, the Quebec government decided no, that actually doesn't work that well. And it doesn't work that well because it's not a good way of actually creating childcare spaces. And so what the Quebec government did is said, well, we're going to fund the provision of childcare. We're going to fund the providers of childcare directly so that they're in a position to put in place high-quality services. Why has that not happened across the country? Well, it's I think, a couple of things. One, it's a question of priorities. And one, I think, for too many years, and this is starting to change, governments and have said that, well, the responsibility for care of young children, especially children under 4, really is a family responsibility uniquely. And yet 50 years ago, you know, we had a Royal Commission on the Status of Women, and they said it should be a joint responsibility, family and government together.
I want to pick up on wait times, because we know across, at least in the province of Ontario, most childcare facilities already have wait lists. In Kitchener-Waterloo, for example, 100% of childcare centres have a wait list. The government has promised, at least the Ontario government has promised to bring this in by 2020, but can they keep up with the demand? If we already are paying some of the highest in the country and there's wait lists, where are the spaces going to come from?
Well, we have, in Ontario, there's definitely a problem of not enough spaces. That is true also across the country. There are enough licensed childcare spaces for about a quarter, 25% or a little bit less, of children between the ages of 0 and 5. And so we know we have a huge shortage of spaces. And we know, too, that if a government announces free childcare, we would expect kind of a rush on those spaces, and that right now in Ontario, they're not enough. So that is one of the reasons that we're pleased, actually, that the government of Ontario is proposing to do this not tomorrow, but to phase it in and to make it fully available, the free aspect of preschool care, until 2020. So that gives a few years for the government to spend money to actually create more spaces, and they've committed to doing that. So I think that's a really important part of the plan. And the other thing is that all these spaces have to be staffed. So it's one thing to create childcare, it's another thing to make sure that they're early childhood educators who are trained, who are in place to provide the service. And again, the Ontario government, as part of its announcement, is making a very wise decision to look at the compensation provided to early childhood educators and to lift that up so that more people will be attracted to train for the profession, and then it'll also be possible for centers to recruit staff and retain them. So I think it's a good plan.
All right, Morna Ballantyne, good to talk to you from Ottawa this morning.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.